I remember the first day when I kind of deployed the change with the new paid plan. I waited the whole day refreshing the Stripe page, waiting for first customer. And eventually it came. I had the first payments by the end of the day, and I was so happy about it. Eventually, months after months, it grew.
In today's episode, we have Julien Nahum, founder of NoteForms, which is a specialized form builder for Notion users. It was started in 2021 and has a monthly recurring revenue of $37,000. Welcome, Julien.
Hey, Felix. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you on. So, first of all, you did not always launch businesses and successful startups like you have now. You were working at AWS before, at Amazon, before venturing into basically developing your own independent software. Can you tell us more about your career before launching your business and what you were doing?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I worked at AWS for a year and a half. But even before then, during my studies, I was studying computer science in London. I was doing a lot of freelancing, mostly, software development jobs. And then early on, I started developing my own kind of side businesses. It was not super successful. I created some kind of small SaaS businesses, and they were not like, most of them pretty much failed without getting any users. But I really, enjoyed building product like this. But then decided after graduation that, it would be reasonable for me to at least can get one proper job experience. So I went to AWS, stayed there for a year and a half. I learned a lot. It was really a great experience. But then at some point I decided that, it was time to kind of give myself a shot and try to go full time on the projects I had on the side.
Yeah, and I want to talk about this that you had launched multiple side projects prior to NoteForms. You mentioned they were in the SaaS space, not super successful. I think this is important to talk about because I think a lot of people think that there's some kind of gift or talent that a tech entrepreneur has, and they launch a business, their first one or second one maybe, and all of a sudden it takes off. But it sounds like you went through multiple different attempts at starting a business. Can you tell us more about maybe what you learned about that, where if you can go into some details about what they were and like maybe why they weren't as successful as NoteForms, and then we'll talk about what made NoteForms successful.
Yeah, sure. So just to cite a few, there was one called Patato, which was a digital restaurant menu, using QR code, which was kind of trendy during COVID and slightly before then. So I built this with a friend, and, we actually did manage to get few customers. I think we reached 1K monthly recurring revenue, but it was really painful to go this business because, like restaurant industry is pretty traditional. It's not really tech friendly. So we kind of got bored of it, and it was really kind of painful to go. We also, with the same friend, worked on, for instance, an aggregator of real estate listing in London, to simplify finding a flat to rent, or later we added also properties to buy. But we never, we got like maybe 100 users, never made any money out of this one. I think we realized later on that the real estate market in London is so fluid that actually there isn't even a need for an aggregator, like real estate, like owners might publish a property listing, and then 1 or 2 days in, it could be already not available anymore. So for that one, I think we kind of misunderstood the market. But overall, I'd say that with every project, I, learned a lot. You learn to focus on the right things. Like for your first project, you might spend, a day trying to find how to come up with a privacy policy page, or how to set up a legal structure, or, that kind of details that may seem a bit overwhelming, but after some time you realize aren't that important. And, like it's better just to start with something a bit scrappy than just waste too much time on it. Also, from a technical point of view, since I was working on the same technical stack, which means, I was using the same tool to build each of these products, I was able to reuse a lot of code. I was getting better at using them. And, I was saving a lot of time creating new products. So that's also something I recommend, like just
Mhm.
keep using the same tools. Like you're trying to create a business, you're not really there to learn about new tech, which is of course something I like to do and I enjoy, but it kind of, yeah, I think it may slow you down.
Yeah, so lots of Great stuff there that I want to unpack. And I want to first start off with the restaurant menu where you were able to hit 1,000, was it US dollars or was it
Yeah.
in, okay, 1,000 US dollars monthly recurring revenue, which I think a lot of people consider that a success, or at least you reach some kind of milestone in your entrepreneurship career where you're now generating $1,000 in monthly recurring revenue. Can you talk about how you're able to get your first customers that way? And like, is that a repeatable process for the subsequent businesses that you attempted to start?
Not really, I think, because the customers were restaurant owners, and basically there was no way to reach out to them digitally. You know, they don't have like a proper email address. You can just email them, and they'll reply. I think they're already flooded with tons of offers and competitors trying to get to them. So the only way that really worked out for us was just to go door to door and try to convince them in person, which is not something that we really enjoyed doing. Of course, it was, an interesting learning, but it was not scalable, and we'd rather stay home and work on the product and set up ads campaign or whatever was it than doing in-person settings. So that was one friction point. We even tried different things like emailing them at the restaurant, like I'm not sure how you said, but like, proper mail, not email. We did many different things like that, but it didn't really work out. So we found that, at least for us, only the door-to-door kind of thing worked, and we were not really ready to do it. So at some point, we just stopped.
Yeah, that's a good point that depending on what industry you're focused on or what kind of customers you have, the way you reach them is going to be completely different. I think a lot of us that are in the tech space, we think that, oh, everyone's will discover our product online. But in this example, they might be online, but it's not the best way to stand out to reach these customers. So on that topic of like different industries, you mentioned the restaurant industry, real estate, and then eventually, no, again, we'll get into your success in a second. But how did you choose which industries or what problems to focus on? Because these seem like completely different fields that you're targeting.
Honestly, it was very. So I was living at the time with my best friend, so we were flatmates, and we were both super into entrepreneurship, and we were just working on the ideas or the pain we had. So the first thing we built, which was kind of successful, was a train tickets secondhand marketplace, because we were living in London, but as French, we had to take the train quite often to go back to Paris. And the train tickets were super expensive. So we found out, like, hey, let's swap tickets with other people just to, save a bit of money. So that's kind of a pain we had. The real estate thing, we started working on it as I decided to move out, actually to move in with my girlfriend. So I was, like leaving my friend. So he was looking for a flat. So we said, hey, let's build that. So it was really kind of out of a need. Like they say, eat your own dog food. So that's really what we were doing here. Except, I guess, for the restaurant one, where it was more a timing related opportunity. COVID was there. There were a lot of restrictions. Restaurants had to collect their customer details in case of a COVID infection. So it was more of a timing opportunity than for the West. But usually it's just things that, we kind of needed.
Yeah, what do you recommend then for someone that's trying to launch their first thing, or they're trying to launch their first successful business? Do you recommend they kind of go with the opportunistic timing, looking for those opportunities, or solving your own problem? Like, are there pros and cons to each one? Which one do you recommend?
I mean, it was quite hard to really, like recommend one way or the other. I think, like both can lead to success. That being said, creating a product where for yourself, or you're the user of your own product, probably makes it easier to test it, iterate on it, and see what's wrong with it. That can be really useful when developing the product, adding features, seeing what's wrong with it. I think the best thing to do is probably to find what's your edge. Maybe if you're coming from a specific industry and you know of some pains that people in that industry may have, then it can be a really good opportunity, because like if you experience it, if you know something that's very industry specific, then not a lot of other people might know about it. And it kind of gives you an edge over your other businesses.
Yeah, I think that makes sense as again another option, which is you mentioned finding your own edge, which could mean solving your own problem. Maybe it's a problem that you face your industry, or maybe it's a problem that you see others in the industry facing. I think the idea is to just don't come like fresh, like brand new, where you're not only learning about the industry and learning about the problem, and then also trying to learn about how to solve it. I think that's like a lot to take on. I think one thing that you did mention earlier, which is that I forget which project you mentioned that you eventually got bored of it. Is that, I guess, how do you decide when to move on? So I think that this is maybe a skill, or it's something that I see a lot of successful entrepreneurs have, which is that they know how to move on quickly on things, and they can identify whether it's worth investing more time into it. And I think people that are less experienced can tend to either quit too early, or they get, I guess the phrase of like, don't, they're afraid to like kill their babies, where like you start this thing, you spend so much time on it, it's hard for you to move on from it. Is it something that you've gotten better at? Like, how do you determine when it's time to move on from an attempt of a business or project to another one?
Yeah, I think this is a very good point. Starting a business is super hard. Knowing when to stop is also super, super hard, maybe even harder. I don't know if I got any better at it. It's just that I was not enjoying it anymore. I didn't want to scale this further. And I had other ideas. I had a full-time job as well, because this was, like during the nights and weekends while I was working at AWS. So it was really intense and I wasn't enjoying it anymore. So for me, it was just, I didn't feel bad, like stopping it. I was kind of excited for whatever we could find next. But in general, I think it's really hard. And probably a good way of looking at it is kind of evaluating your opportunity cost. So, for instance, in my case, it was getting painful. I was super tired working all the time and I wasn't enjoying it. So I knew it was not super sustainable and I didn't feel like, this was going to boom and become a huge business. So I thought, like I might as well kind of preserve myself, take it easy and focus on some other things later on.
Yeah, and speaking of being able to kind of identify what is the right thing to be doing, you mentioned too, when you are working on a specific product or business, you've gotten better at identifying what are the most important things to focus on. What tips do you have to here where how do you, what kind of questions do you ask, or how do you evaluate whether what you are working on is actually the most important thing to be focused on, especially early on, especially when it's like a kind of a moonlight, like nights and weekend kind of project?
That's also something very tricky. Like there are different schools, like some people tell you create a landing page, put a form on it, put some ads on this landing page and see how many people basically kind of evaluate the traction for whatever you're offering. To be honest, I've never really done that. I really enjoy building products. So usually what I try to do is to build an MVP as fast as possible and try to get some feedback on the actual thing. Of course, that doesn't work with every product. Like some products are too complex for this to be done, but that's the way I do usually. Like, I never just wake up with a new random ID and then, start coding. Usually it's quite a long process. I have an ID because I hear about something and then I start looking a bit more into it. Kind of, so for instance, I could browse Reddit around the subject. I could, try to get more info and I kind of do this in the background and, like I try to learn about the potential users. And then one day, if I'm convinced enough, I'll start building an MVP and try to get users and feedback as fast as possible. But I don't really have a systematic way of, deciding what to do and what to focus on. I guess it's more like gut feelings here, but
Yeah, well,
I'm not sure that's the good thing.
I think one thing that is good though is that you kind of give space in between the time that you have a seed of an idea and you actually investing like time and effort into it. I think the whole shiny object syndrome that people get stuck in, where they have an idea and then they just go like right away into building right away, rather than kind of letting it kind of marinate a bit, and just so that it's almost like as if you have an idea and then you leave the honeymoon phase where you're so inspired by it and you still think it's a good idea, then I often see like that's usually the kind of best ideas to pursue, rather than just kind of get wrapped up in the excitement right away. So it sounds like you give some space at least in between the seed and like the beginning of it all. I want to talk a little bit about the one thing you mentioned earlier, which is that you tried not initially you got buried in the learning of new things. I think especially software engineers, I think we come from this background where we like learning new things. Otherwise, like, I mean, that's how it's like the requirement for the field where you're always learning new things. And you think that when you start a business, you should learn what's the best thing to do for this particular idea and just spend all this time learning rather than actually building or solving a specific problem. Can you talk a little bit about what is your current stack right now? Like, how do you, is there a way, have you gotten better at spinning up a SaaS product? Like, what do you use?
On the back end, I use a PHP framework called Laravel. The funny story is that when I started, learning coding, everyone was talking about Rails, which is kind of an equivalent Ruby framework. But at the time, I just couldn't manage to install Ruby on like the programming language on my PC, and I just kind of gave up on it, and then found Laravel, and then just stick with it for literally the past 10 years. So that's for the backend. For the front end, we use Vue and a framework called Nux. And then usually Postgres for the database. Everything is hosted on AWS since, like I work there, it got a bit easier for me to go around it. And yeah, that's pretty much, the core of the stack.
Yeah.
And it's been the same for literally the whole time. I have kind of my starter kit, and yeah,
Mhm.
that's how I do it.
Yeah. And I just to kind of drive home the point of how important it is to just get better at the tooling and like reusing what you already know. Can you give an idea of like how long it would take? And again, I think this varies from product to product, but like how long did it take you to launch the first product using this stack versus like the most recent attempt at starting using this stack? Like how much faster did you get at using this stack, this process?
The first time it was pretty slow, like just building the app. I remember it was a freelancing gig I took, and it was the first time I was, building an app full stack on my own. And it was really overwhelming. I worked on it for maybe 2, 3, 4 months. I had to learn how to deploy an app, how to manage it, how to make sure it doesn't, have bugs, that kind of thing. So literally, I spent months working on one project. And now I can probably, like launch an MVP in a few days because, like for deployments, everything is set up from one project to the other. I literally just have to push a button. And then essentially when I create a new project, I just need to focus on the core code, like, like the project
Hmm.
specific
The business
logic
logic.
and
Yeah.
then, yeah, that's it. And the rest is already done. So it's a huge save of time. Even things like front-end components, that kind of things, I just reuse everything I have.
Yeah, I think that again, just to drive home this point, you mentioned the first time took months, so like over a span of a year, like maybe you're launching six ideas, but if, as you got better, you mentioned days, so like that could be hundreds of ideas that you can. You're probably more limited by the ideas than the time at that point, because I think that you just speed up so quickly that you can try out more things. And I think that's an important aspect of like trying to land on the right thing. So let's get on to like the landing on the right thing. So No Forms was the one that really took off. Maybe start at the beginning. What project were you coming off of before starting No Forms? Like where did the idea come from?
So at the time, I had just left AWS and I kind of stopped working around the same time on the restaurant thing. So I had no real project. I was trying to work on many different small ideas I had, but I wasn't really convinced by them. So either I didn't even share them or like publish them, or maybe I did, but I felt that it wasn't the right thing. So I just kept iterating. It's also a time where, I was kind of trying to have fun. I was contributing a bit to open source, learning a bit more about the whole tech ecosystem. And I also, at the time, I discovered the whole indie hacker scene. I started following people on Twitter and got a bit more inspired. And around that time, Notion, which I was using for maybe like 4 or 5 years before then, and I still really love Notion. I have all of my life on it, like personal, professional, everything. At the time, they released their API, which they didn't have before. So it allowed developers like me to just build on top of it. And I thought, that's really cool. I need to build something with it. And then randomly, can't exactly remember how it happened, but I remember that Airtable, which is kind of similar product where they have these no-code databases, they had the form feature. So from an existing database, you could just have like a form view where you could share the form and people filling the form would result in you having a new row, a new submission in your database. And I thought, that's really cool. And that's definitely something that's missing for Notion. So I just created an MVP and shared it online.
Yeah, let's talk about that launch, that last part. You created MVP and launched it online. How did you launch? Like, where did you launch it to? How did you get the feedback on it? What was the actual launch process like?
Yeah. So I think I built the first version in 4 or 5 days. And then at the time, as I mentioned, I learned about all these indie hackers on Twitter. So I started tweeting, but, like, no one knew me. I had no followers. So I was kind of tweeting in the void, but I started building it public, which I think later on helped with the growth. But basically, yeah, I was tweeting. And then as soon as the product was live, I just shared it on Reddit, on Facebook groups, on essentially every Notion related online communities I could find. Usually these kind of communities don't really like, to be spammed, and they don't like promotion for good reason, I think, because people can really be like, pushy and spammy. But at the time, I was, like offering the first Notion related tool because it was simply not possible to build some before. So people were super curious about it. And also the entire thing was free. There wasn't even like a billing system. Like the whole product was free. So it wasn't like I was advertising to make some money. So it felt, I think, to these communities like I wasn't really trying to, make money out of them.
So, what was the reception like? Did the MVP you built, like, was it truly the right features to launch with? Did you learn about what features to build next? Like, how quickly? What was the feedback?
People are really excited about it. So honestly, when I look few weeks back, I looked at the MVP, how it looked like, and it has changed so much since then. The product was really scrappy. There were basically no features. You could just build the form and that's it. But people were super excited about it. They shared it. Word of mouth kicked in real quick. And also they were sending me tons of feature requests, because Form Builder is a simple product, but when you look at competitions, there are many, many features you might want when using a form builder. And I was receiving all of these feature requests, which I kind of, like kept and organized in a backlog. And I just worked on adding the features one by one.
When you think about what features to add next, is it just based on your intuition or the number of people requesting the same feature? How do you decide what to focus your time on?
Yeah, it was kind of a mix between both. So I wasn't really super organized counting every request for every feature. But since I was doing the customer support, I had the live chat on the website. I had a sense of what's most requested and also, what makes sense from a technical point of view for me to integrate next. So it was kind of a mix between all of these.
Did you remember a feature that, kind of a two-part question, a feature that you launched that you didn't think would make that big of a difference, either to the user's happiness or to the growth of the number of users, but it did have a bigger impact than you thought? And then the follow-up is the opposite, where you launched something that you thought would do great, but then just didn't have the same kind of impact that you thought it would have.
I don't have particular examples in mind, but both definitely happened. Sometimes, I'd work on something for 2 weeks and then no one would really care. And sometimes I would just release something, a really small detail, a new feature, or maybe just a better UX to do something. And then I would receive messages saying, hey, this is really great. And people were excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, do you feel like you've gotten better at identifying what the right features are, or like what do you look at now that you maybe weren't looking at earlier on that lets you dial in on the right features to spend your time on?
I think what helped the most was to have the live chat on the website. It's really tough because then you get tons of messages. It never stops. It's intense. And I was, like the only one replying to message for a year and a half or maybe 2 years. But that really helped me, stay in touch with the users, understand what's wrong with the product and iterate faster. So being accessible and easy to be contacted. We also have, like a kind of a more structured feedback board where user can report bugs, can suggest new features and they can upvote them and there are like comments. So it's a bit more organized, but we still receive tons of features, just via the live chat. And so now it's kind of a mix between everything.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about the timeline here and the trajectory of the growth. So you mentioned that this project was pretty much launched within less than a week. You put it out there. When did the first paying customer come along, and like did it kind of take off from there, or like where is it more gradual, or what was the growth of the business after you launched it?
So as I mentioned, the product was entirely free. And then when I realized people were excited about it, I thought I could maybe monetize it, but I felt I had kind of an imposter syndrome, I guess, because there were like these really cool and huge companies building form builders, and it was just me alone building a very simple one. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna build maybe new features and improve the product for the next 2 months. Once I'm a bit more confident about it, I will, add a paywall and say this set of features is now paid. Of course, as I was adding them, I was, mentioning that, hey, like it's free for now, but eventually it will become a paid feature. And then one day I just flipped the switch and said, hey guys, from now on, like these advanced features are now part of the paid plan we have. And then it was super like slow. It was really kind of a linear growth. That, like I remember the first day when I kind of deployed the change with the new paid plan. I waited the whole day refreshing the Stripe page, waiting for first customer. And eventually it came. I had the first payments by the end of the day, and I was so happy about it. But then, there were a lot of ups and downs. Some days I wasn't getting any users. Some days I was, having users requesting refunds. But eventually, months after months, it grew. And yeah, it's been going since then, essentially.
When you think back about, so you launched in 2021, it's now, three-ish years since that launch. Were there any specific skills that you felt like if you had earlier on or you had developed earlier on in the journey would have been much more helpful or would have been very helpful for you back then?
It's hard to say. Like, honestly, I feel that I've learned a lot working on this project. Things that, felt overwhelming to me 3 years ago are now, like things I don't even need to think about. It's quite hard to think of what, but just from a technical point of view, for instance, on the front end, form builder is heavily like it is a heavy product on the front end side because you want to be able to add blocks, drag them around. So there is really kind of this no code builder which can quickly become a complex product. And I was not super, like comfortable with advanced front end at the time. Now I got much better at it. So yeah, there was definitely the technical aspect, but then I learned also how to hire. Outsourcing is definitely something I learned and which I use quite a lot nowadays, and which is really a relief because it allows me to do more. It allows me to avoid doing things that I'm not good at or that I don't enjoy doing. So yeah, that's a big one as well.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about the one of the issues is the platform risk that you're building on top of Notion. And did you mention that Notion's also already built their own form builder as well? Or what's the current, I guess, risk today with building the platform risk that is by building on just Notion?
So I think the only real platform risk is Notion, at least from what I've seen. So I have really good relation with them. NoteForms is an official partner integration. So, we went through security reviews with them. We, exchange kind of on a regular basis. So the risk would be more if they decided to natively build what your product offers. So this is kind of what's happening with NoteForms right now, where they are about to release, they already communicated about it, but they're about to release a form view for that database product. I think it's going to be an interesting period for us. It's not their core product. Like they don't want to be like the form builder. They have tons of features and this is just going to be one of them. So, the worst scenario would be that their product is good enough for all Notion users and then everyone will churn from NoteForms. And the best case scenario is that, people will kind of discover or at least be more educated about the fact that you can work with Notion and Forms, but then realize that there are some limitations to the native capabilities of the Notion form builder. And maybe in that case, they will hear about us. So I don't know yet what's going to happen, but, I think it's going to be interesting. And I'm, looking forward to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, well, I think I really appreciate that kind of abundance mindset where if Notion does build their own form builder or build more tooling that's similar to yours, it grows the overall pie. It brings attention in from the market, grows your market, and might lead to people looking for more advanced tooling or more specialized tooling and going over to no forms. So I'll leave you this last question. What's next for no forms? Like, what do you want to focus your attention on, your time on over the next year?
What we're currently working on mostly is we're trying to really polish the product. Now that we know that Notion is going to release their own form builder, we want the product to be as easy as possible to be used. So we're trying to get rid of all the friction you may have using an external form builder, like an integration. We've been tons of work with designing the product, making everything a bit less cluttered and more organized. We also spent quite some time trying to improve the onboarding, being better at communicate the changes we make. But yeah, for the coming year, I think it'll be mostly focused on this, making the product better and adding all of the features that people may have and may desire with a form builder, but that Notion would probably never release. So for instance, that could be, like having a payment integration, like a form that can have a payments component to it. So that kind of things.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Julian. Thanks for coming on and sharing your journey, your advice, and experience with us.
My pleasure, Felix.